Hello and welcome to What It Takes. I'm Tom Landon. If you follow the news even a little, you're probably aware that there's a severe housing shortage in America, especially for lower income people. And while it's not as extreme here in the Blue Ridge as it is in places like New York and San Francisco, we still have many people in the region unable to find affordable, high-quality rental housing. My guests today are trying to change that. Founded in 2014, Restoration Housing is a community-based nonprofit developer focusing on the historic preservation of neglected architectural resources for the social benefit of low-income communities. At the core of everything Restoration Housing does is the belief that all people, regardless of circumstance, deserve to live in strong, healthy communities and dignified housing, the catalyst being the reinvestment in our historic built environment. Joining me today are Executive Director Isabel Thornton and Maribeth Mills, Development Coordinator. Thank you guys both for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
And a lot of times my opening statements are built pretty strongly from like the mission statement on your website, and I will admit to that in this case as well. But before we talk about the work of Restoration Housing specifically, I'm curious how you got into this and how it became an interest for you, Isabel.
It's a bit of a long story. I'll try to keep it short. I have always loved architectural history. I think that's at the root of it. And I studied architectural history in college. There's not a lot you can do with that as a profession. So, there were sort of these narrow opportunities. I went into graduate school for historic preservation, which is, one of the ways that you can extend upon that kind of learning. And historic preservation, again, narrow opportunities. You can work for a state office of historic preservation. You can get into the construction side of restoring bricks and, old cornices. But what really fascinated me was doing development work with preservation. And there were a few people doing that in Los Angeles where I was in graduate school. And there was one group in particular called Heritage Housing Partners, and they're a nonprofit in Pasadena that both combines preservation and affordable housing into their models. And they were restoring little bungalows around Pasadena and little bungalow courts and these really, adorable, for lack of a better word, kind of housing, and doing it in a beautiful way and keeping it affordable. So it was very inspiring to me that I think that early on maybe set part of the idea that this could be done. But it was just many years later, after getting more experience with affordable housing and development work more broadly, and after that experience, kind of trying to create this model.
And Maribeth, there's always a strong need for good development people everywhere. As somebody who works in the nonprofit world, what brought you to where you are?
I do not have a background in development. I actually have a similar background to Isabel. I'm a historic preservation and urban planning major, and worked for a long time in local government. And through that, we actually did an event for a few years at the Jeff Center called Renovate Roanoke. It was a old house fair. We had workshops with specialized craftsmen, and through that, I kind of discovered I had a knack for event planning and marketing and doing all of that, and really saw it as a way, another avenue to help the preservation movement and things like that. And so once the opportunities arose to get into the nonprofit world, which is where I always wanted to be, being able to work for an organization that you can just really focus on mission-driven work that you truly believe is benefiting the community you live in. I knew that's where I wanted to be, and bringing that skill set to Restoration Housing has been great.
I think it's interesting because, until I started researching what you all do, and I've known about your work for a while, but the whole idea of like historic preservation seems to live in one world, low, affordable housing seems to live in another. It seems like a complicated way to provide housing for lower income people. What are some of the special challenges that you face you want to restore one of the beautiful old houses, for example, on Patterson Avenue here in Roanoke, and when you're done, to be able to turn it over to folks who maybe wouldn't normally be able to afford to live in a place that nice.
Well, that's a great point. That's I'd probably speak to the first part of that
Sure.
first, where you mentioned the dual part of our mission. It's a dual mission in that we are both restoring and preserving, and then we are also, at the end of the rehab, there are these really large overhauls. When they're finished, we own and manage the property. So we're actually the landlords to the tenants, and it's a big piece of our mission is to be good stewards of the property and be really good landlords. And in our work, what we've found is there is actually, unlike San Francisco and DC and Brooklyn, there's a great amount of existing affordable housing stock in Roanoke. We don't necessarily have a lack of available housing stock. It's just that it's really low quality. And some of the quality, I mean, the housing units that I've seen are just really upsetting to see. The conditions that people live in and what we call affordable housing are unacceptable living conditions.
Right, when we talk about like affordable, in many people's minds, I think it probably affordable equals substandard.
Right. And that's a lot of what we see in Roanoke in our historic neighborhoods. And so Roanoke's historic neighborhoods have just seen a lot of disinvestment over decades. And because of that, what's left behind these houses that have been neglected and decades of deferred maintenance, you have substandard living conditions that it's considered affordable, but is really unfortunate. And so we're trying to offer something that maybe reflects the same price point and is affordable, but is a really high quality alternative. But as for the challenges, I think that there are so many, and it's kind of, each project is unique in its own way. We basically find the house first, and then once we found a house, we do one house a year. We decide, okay, what is the target demographic for this house? It may be a family making between 50 and 60% of the area median income, or it may be more workforce housing, which is like 60 to 80% of the area median income. And we base it off of where the house is and the neighborhood. Then we look for funding sources, then we create unit matrices, and everything is unique to that house. And so I would say the challenges are unique every year. They're a little different. And it could be anything from a neighborhood group that doesn't want more rental housing, or a particularly tricky floor plan that we can't, like a big house on Patterson Avenue, 17th or 18th Street in Patterson. Those houses are so big that to keep them and keep a unit mix affordable, you'd have to really divide them up in a way that may not be very nice or I guess respectful of the historic character of the house. So that would be a unique challenge. And I think for that for our development work, those are very particular instances, but there's all kinds of challenges, I think, too, in sort of getting our messaging out and what we do because of the dual mission. So you could probably speak to that a little bit more.
I bet that's right. When you talk to people, and it is an organization that's restoring these old houses, but also as a landlord, do you find difficulty in kind of finding people who are willing to, because you're a nonprofit, you're seeking donations and assistance, do you find that's a big hurdle for you? Like, yes, you're helping us, and then we're going to be a landlord for it afterwards.
I guess in terms of messaging, I find it very easy to talk about restoration housing and having that dual mission. I feel like for so many years, I've heard, preservation, it's just a nice thing to do, but it's not very practical. And I think we bring a very practical and tangible outcome through preservation. And we have a lot of supporters. Some are just very interested in the rehabilitation work. There are others that are interested in the affordable housing side. So we have a very diverse base of supporters. And I think through that, they kind of get interested in the other side of it. And like I said, I think it's an easy mission to go and talk to people about.
Well, so one of the challenges I think is, well, she and I both see a lot of, we find the before and after of these houses just fascinating. We love this stuff, but we don't always know if that translates as well to our donors. Some people are much more connected to seeing the people, the tenants, the families that are living there. And so what Maribeth's been great at is sort of trying to capture more of the stories of the neighbors, the tenants, the people that are more directly affected, because when you're doing large capital improvements to a building, it's not as much of a it doesn't pull on your heartstrings quite the same way, I think, when you see those images versus the actual impact it has on families.
You talked a little bit about the neighbors and sometimes reticence, oh, this is rental property, although many of the places you're doing work, there's a lot of rental property there already. Some of the places where you're doing work, and we will be showing photos of what you're doing, how is that affecting, you're doing one house a year, which is great, but how is that also leading, for example, on Day Avenue or some of those other places, to others then coming in and saying, oh, this is a place where investment makes sense? Are you seeing that?
Yeah. I think I told Maribeth one of the most, I think it was one of the happiest things, for me to hear, was I just had a conversation one day with somebody from the city of Roanoke. I think he worked for, it was some grant we were trying to go for, and I never met him in person, but I was on the phone with him about a year and a half ago, and he said, I saw what you all did on Patterson Avenue, and I was so inspired by it that my wife and I bought a house in Southeast, and we're restoring it ourselves. And it just was the best feeling in the world to hear that, because it was so, just reaffirming of what we're trying to do, to show not only that, reinvestment is important, but that it's, very much achievable. It doesn't have to be, so scary to go to a neighborhood that maybe has been lacking in investment. I think that there's a lot of, misinterpretation sometimes of what a neighborhood like that might feel like from both a property value standpoint. People are scared they may not get a resale value if they invest in a property in a neighborhood that hasn't had a lot of investment. Or they're, worried of, the stigmatization of just a neighborhood that might have more crime or vacancy and blight. And for someone to see the potential when you go in there without those, barriers and the fear, and he realized it, and I think it was just very reaffirming for us.
That the first house, I think the first house you did was on Day Avenue in Old Southwest, right? Old Southwest, for those of you who don't live in Roanoke, it can come with its own set of circumstances, because you're not the only ones who want to make sure that it's architecturally restored, right?
Yes.
And yet those streets are now doing so much better than they were when I moved here. What role does that sort of thing, like an architectural review board, for example, does that make your work more difficult? Clearly you support the mission, but when it comes to developing a property, what does that do for that?
I'd say it's actually not as limiting as you might think. A lot of people in neighborhoods that have ARB review do find it difficult, but it can be and it can't be. So we use historic tax credits for our projects that basically require that we comply with the state and federal government for all the work that we do in order to receive pretty substantial sums of money that then go towards our construction costs. And if we're complying with tax credit standards, they're called the Secretary of the Interior standards, it usually means that we're already in compliance with an ARB review. They're pretty much hand in hand with what they're looking for. They want you to, honor all the original materials and historic integrity of the exterior, and we're doing that both on the interior and the exterior of each house. The one example kind of more recently where this has been an issue, though, is we completed a rehab on Day Avenue. It was our first project over 5 years ago, and we now need to replace the roof. We did not replace the roof in our rehab, so now we don't need to comply with tax credits, but we do need to comply with ARB, and the roof is a metal roof. And to comply with the ARB review, we need to spend probably between $20,000 and $30,000 more on a hand-rolled metal roof versus a standing seam manufactured roof. And for a nonprofit, now we don't have the grant resources, we don't have the tax credits, we don't have the things that we need to that we have at the beginning of each project.
Now you're like every other landlord.
Yeah,
who
now
might
we're
own
like
a rental
every
property
landlord or homeowner.
Or homeowner in El Salvador.
And so I see that as like a very limiting thing for people that want to reinvest in their homes or see their neighbors reinvest. And so the alternative is you see a roof just kind of continue
keep
to
patching, and then having to repair inside.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think too that as someone that's worked in local government for a very long time and in that realm, I think as we've progressed with those, there's been a lot better attempt to educate people before they move in that you are moving, because there was a lot of people that were blindsided by that, but that you are moving into that. And there are so many studies on the benefits to property owners of living in a neighborhood that, yes, I'm subjected to these, but I know across the street, you're subjected to the same thing.
Right.
And
the character's going to be preserved.
Right, the
and
context
that's the
of my property is going to be preserved. And so, yeah, it definitely can be a double-edged sword, and working within those confines and finding a good outcome for the neighborhood, but then also for the property owner.
Maribeth, you mentioned that you had worked on putting on, fairs and things to attract people to this kind of work, and the kind of workers who can do this kind of work, and in many ways you're kind of preserving a legacy of this stuff. How hard is it to find qualified labor? We're in a nationwide labor shortage right now, but how hard is it to find those very specialized workers who can do that kind of roof, or who can do plaster lath work that isn't taught in trade schools anymore?
For a specialized project, it can be difficult. I think if we're talking about, so from a maintenance perspective, the roof work can be difficult when we need just a little repair here and there. Finding somebody that will do something minimal for us, where there are so many challenges right now to get somebody on your schedule for a real rehab. All the contractors I know are just booked up. We haven't had trouble finding skilled labor for our rehabs. We've used one contractor 5 times now for 5 of our rehabs, and we're using a new contractor for the first time on our 6th project, and we're actually beginning next week. I
guess that's the good thing about always having one in process is that you could call your guy who knows how to do, or woman who knows how to do this kind of plumbing or this kind of window.
That's exactly what we do. We have our rehab going on, and if we have a maintenance issue at another house, we'll call our contractor and say, can you help us out at this other house? We have this issue. And I think we're able to do that largely because of good relationships, and because the projects we're doing, they're never too big, but they're big enough that we're still paying substantial money for that work. But it can be hard when we have a maintenance issue for a different house that has a very specific need, and it's historic, and maybe we're not working with a contractor on a rehab at that time. This roof, for instance, is one of those examples. But we do know a good hand-rolled roof guy if you need one. So we're getting to be specialists, and we have kind of a master vendor list of all these, specialty, people that can do various woodworking things and that sort of thing. Yeah. Roanoke's got some really great craftsmen too. I'm really impressed with what we have to offer.
Yeah, and I think too, like as our portfolio grows of properties, we've transitioned from the rehab role to the stewardship role, and making sure that we're staying on top of all of these properties' maintenance needs. And I think we've been really fortunate too, and the contractor that we've had, he does his own millwork. So I know like at Villa Heights, we had a lot of woodwork that maybe needed to be replicated. And it was wonderful to have someone that, had his own shop.
Right.
And that's been really critical. But I know, through this past year, there were a lot of difficulties with subs and finding new subs. I mean, everyone's just been
We're all in the
taken
same
up.
boat.
So,
I just had some plumbing work done, and it took.
There's a lot of juggling. I think the word over the past 2 years has been pivot.
Right.
Well, and I do want to ask that. COVID obviously affected us all, still affecting us all. How did that impact the project you had working, and how did it change what you all were doing during that time?
That project specifically, we had a project under construction that had begun a few months before March of 2020, and it's 326 Dale Avenue. It finished in November of 2020. And that project in particular, I think we ultimately were very lucky with it. It didn't have a lot of major issues, but it did, we had concerns about contractors working exposure. We didn't know anything about, is this safe to have people working right now? So we paused everything for a while, then we slowly brought them back in, but we were trying to keep everybody safe, and people got sick. They didn't get sick on our project, but they, we had people that had just been there and then found out they were sick a few days later, and we had to shut things down just to be careful. And so it just slowed down, and we were always nervous. I wouldn't say that it heavily affected that project's outcome, but probably where it affected the most was our fundraising abilities and connecting with our donors, which we totally pivoted on that point heavily, and Maribeth can tell you all the different ways we did, and we continue to.
Yes,
I mean, because we're still in it,
Well, and it's, I think that everyone, me in particular, you learn to be a videographer almost, because the only way you can connect is virtually.
I really think that everybody's technology skills.
Yeah, so I was on YouTube. Okay, how do I use this software to edit videos and things like that? And so, as terrifying as it was in the moment, I really think that it forced us to communicate with our supporters in a different way, and it's been a positive. And as we've kind of navigated through this and started returning to some of our things, so in 2019 was our last year we had an in-person luncheon. The next year we had to do a virtual campaign. And now as we've moved forward, we did have an in-person luncheon outdoors last year, but we kept the virtual component. So now we have a hybrid event where we have a small luncheon, but then the following 4 weeks, we then have a video series that people at home that maybe can't attend a luncheon or that did attend,
coming out,
or
who did attend but now they have this extra. So it gives you another way to reach out to people. I want to talk a little bit about how people qualify to live in one of your buildings.
I would say it again is dependent on the house. So we have one house usually under construction at any given moment, and then one that's kind of wrapping up and leasing up. And when, for that project, we look at our grant sources, and if the grant sources have any requirements, then, so we, for several projects, have received funding from the city of Roanoke for either community development block grant funding or home funds that comes through HUD. And those funds require that, you have a certain income you're targeting that needs to be a low income household. So for our most recent project that completed back in November 2021, it has a single family living in it. It's a rental, and they have to make, per our application for that funding, between 50 and 60% of the area median income. And that number is based off of Roanoke census data, but it is also weighted by family size. So once you know the family size, then we look at, so this is a family of 7, and it's, a nicely sized house. And like I said, it's a 1-unit house. So we think it's great because it's our first single family rental. It has a nice big backyard and all these amenities of, kind of a home ownership model, but it's affordable rental.
Sure.
And so we partnered with Commonwealth Catholic Charities on that project, and they helped us find the family. We said, they have to have these income limits. We have to verify it with the city of Roanoke, and we have to, make sure that the size of the family is not too big, not too small. And Commonwealth Catholic Charities had actually connected with us first because they had been looking for landlords. Anyone who's a landlord probably heard from them last fall. Looking for housing for Afghan refugees. And so we said, this is the house that we have finishing. These are our limitations. Can you help us find the family, and we'll work with you? And so we had a partnership.
That's great.
So each project is different. And the project before that, we had a partnership with, or continue to have a partnership with Arch Services, and they find the tenants for us in that project.
So there are other
Yeah.
nonprofits that I
Basically.
know just from reading about you all that you're working. I mean, you're a very small organization,
Yes.
so you depend on those others.
We really look through Roanoke and Roanoke's other nonprofits that have the social services side, and we're the housing side, and we just try to kind of come together and work together to make sure the tenants have the best possible outcome.
We only have a very brief amount of time left.
Okay.
We're almost
No
out, but the last question and quick answer here, but how has the real estate sort of boom affected you all? Has it yet?
I don't think so necessarily. Wait and see next year, I guess, because we haven't bought a house. The last house we bought was the one we're about to start construction on, and that was in December of 2020. So I think we need to see. I just talked to a group in Asheville that is trying to do what we're doing, and they bought a house.
That would be really.
Oh, they bought a vacant house, very similar situation, similar neighborhood, kind of that needs reinvestment, vacant for many years. It was $200,000 when they bought it, and the last one we bought was just a tiny fraction of that. So we're lucky in Roanoke maybe, but remains to be seen if we stay lucky.
Great. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time that we do have. The time flies. If you'd like to learn more about the work of Restoration Housing, I urge you to visit their website, restorationhousing.org. For What It Takes, I'm Tom Landon. Thanks for watching, and thank you guys for being here.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.